Alright everybody, hello, welcome back to Dan's Astrology. Today is Friday the 13th of September 2024. We are leading up to a lunar eclipse in Pisces. And I just want to say first of all that admittedly I have been having a bit of a rough time in the sense that since making my last video I have been a little bit feeling a bit of stress and anxiety and having a bit of trouble sleeping. Although yesterday I managed to get a pretty good sleep. So I'm back to make another video. And, you know, part of this could have to do with anxiety around eclipse season. I did mention my dog just recently got diagnosed with diabetes. We're giving her insulin and she seems to be doing better now. And I also, you know, there could also be some anxiety around the fact that my mom has been is got a bunch of tests to do. She went to the doctor and she's going to get a bunch of tests to do for her health. She just turned 70 recently. And so there could be some stress in the family, both around the health of the dog and also my mom. My dad isn't around anymore. For those who know me probably know that. He passed away over 10 years ago. But yeah, so just that I'm kind of coming into this with with some stress and a little bit of anxiety around the eclipses. But with that in mind, there is, I think, reason to be somewhat optimistic. I mean, eclipses in general are usually they don't usually, I mean, they're not by definition something that's positive, but the other dynamics happening around an eclipse can color what the eclipse is like. And so there's a bunch of things, you know, first of all, to consider. First of all, the fact that you've got Saturn and Neptune in Pisces where the eclipse is happening, and that Saturn and Neptune are going to be both ingressing into Aries eventually. So that's one theme to look for, right? The other thing is that the planet that rules the eclipse is Jupiter, and the planet that is the exaltation lord of Pisces is Venus, and that those two planets are both benefic planets, and they're both making a trine aspect to each other, while Jupiter is in Gemini, which is in detriment, but then Venus is in Libra right now, which is in domicile. And so you've got a well-dignified Venus making a trine to Jupiter, and both those planets ruling the eclipse. So in that sense, you know, there may be a kind of a silver lining to the eclipse, perhaps. But one of the things that I was thinking was that in my previous videos on the eclipses that I was doing while we were having the Aries Libra eclipses, a lot of what I was thinking of was the presence of Chiron in Aries, and the Chiron as the wounded healer. And one thing to consider is that Chiron is still in Aries, and as Venus makes this trine to Jupiter, Venus is also going to be making a opposition to Chiron, and Chiron is going to be making a sextile to Jupiter. So, and then, you know, we're having our final, or whatever, the last of the Libra eclipses before fully entering into this Pisces and Virgo eclipse cycle, right? And of course, I think there might be, I don't know, like I have this kind of idea, when I look at eclipses, I don't have any cardinal planets, and most of my planets are in mutable signs. So there could also be, I may have a little bit of anxiety because I have so many mutable placements that this eclipse is probably going to affect me more than the last one. So I'm kind of anticipating that. But there's something, I was also talking about this idea of being impeccable with your word, right? And when I make these videos, I listen to what I'm saying, And I often, even in the video where I was talking about being impeccable with my word, I end up saying things that I'm like, why did I say that? I could have said it better, or not just choosing the wrong words, but like my message is going off, or like I'm kind of missing the mark of the best kind of video I could be making, or the most, or that there's certain things that I have to admit that I don't know at all. I'm not like some, I'm not trying. I'm embracing my own amateurism, right, to some extent, and I'm not trying to put on like I know everything. But there's certain issues that I am in the midst of trying to figure out, right? And one of these issues is with Chiron, the wounded healer. I specifically remember making a video where I was talking about the eclipses and the wounded healer and all this kind of stuff. And I said something about spiritual healing, in that I don't think spiritual healing is really a thing, because there are plenty of enlightened masters who nonetheless got sick and ill, and or like you could be there's not like, by the more spiritually aware you are, that doesn't necessarily mean the more you're just somehow free from accident and injury and disease and illness and all this kind of stuff, right? But however, after doing that, after talking about this, there's certain things that were like, I started questioning that. Like, wait a minute, maybe I'm off with that. Maybe I'm it's like, and I'm just using this as examples because there are certain people who are considered spiritual masters who still had health problems, who still got sick, or that there's a lot of people that talk about in their process of becoming whatever, in their process of going through their spiritual practice, their body, like there's some sort of like getting sick and having trouble with your body that makes you aware of your own mortality, that wakes you up a bit, so that it's not really I don't know, it's a complicated thing, and I'm not saying I have all the answers to it, but there are certain things came up in that there's a guy who I saw before COVID named Malidoma, who was famous. I was involved for a while online in a community around spiritual emergency, and Malidoma wrote the one article that was probably shared in that community more than any other article, what a shaman sees in a mental hospital, or what a shaman sees in a psych ward. And to be honest, at first I was a little bit like put off by just like how frequently this one article is a little bit overdone, like how often people would share this like one article. But Malidoma was actually friends with James Hillman. He was he did talks with James Hillman and Michael Meade and Robert Bly and the mythopoetic men's movement. And if you listen to those talks that Malidoma did, this guy is actually brilliant. And based on the recognition that Malidoma was brilliant, I went to go see Malidoma in person while he was still alive. And it was a quite experience to be like in the room with this guy, and rather than just watching a recording, just to really be there and like kind of see what he was putting down in real life, right? And unfortunately, Malidoma, he was more active, I think, during the 90s. That was when a lot of the recordings of him doing stuff with the men's movement was recorded. And Malidoma passed away. I don't know if it was because of COVID, what the actual circumstances was, but I know he passed away during the coronavirus pandemic. But he's nonetheless an influence on me. But listening to Malidoma talk, Malidoma definitely puts an emphasis on healing, and especially spiritual healing, right? And for me, I'm sort of by saying this thing that like spiritual healing doesn't exist, because even people who are healed still have problems or whatever, right? or sorry, I'm gonna maybe getting distracted. There was at least something about in Malidoma Some's message that kind of reminded me that it was maybe inaccurate to make this argument that spiritual healing isn't really a thing, right? And with this Venus opposition to Chiron, Jupiter sextile to Chiron, Venus and Jupiter making a trine, and just in this, what I'm having this anxiety coming up recently around just health issues in the family, and then also finding out somebody I knew died, and I don't know exactly how this guy died, but there's something about the whole circumstance about this, and the idea of, Venus having to do with attraction, right? Or Venus having to do with desire, or Venus having to do with social stuff, right? And I studied astrology. I studied astrology with Adam Ellenboss while I started living in Nanaimo, living with this girl that I met. And I have to admit that I don't want to come off as being overly judgmental or anything like that, or like high and mighty or something, but I mean, whatever. I can't be judgmental because I allowed myself to get pulled into it, right? In that when I met this girlfriend, I had just spent 1 year being totally sober, and I was like using vaping nicotine or whatever. So I wasn't like but I was like doing my best to try to clean up and be sober and all this kind of stuff. And this girlfriend was drinking and using weed and all this other kind of stuff, and I got pulled back into that lifestyle. And I don't know if this town that I ended up moving to, Nanaimo, tends to have a kind of a bad reputation for a lot of people who are drinkers. And I don't know, I haven't been in contact with the people from that town, but I'm just assuming that maybe that played a role in whatever happened to this guy that died. And what I'm noticing coming up for me recently is something about, okay, first of all, Pisces. There's certain things, Pisces is a water sign. Sometimes Pisces has, the water signs in general, a lot of water can sometimes have this association of like a lot of emotional stuff, and kind of like, or the tendency to try to like self-medicate your emotions, all this kind of stuff. And the presence of Saturn there, maybe a kind of like trying to put a protective wall against that, or at least I there's something about the whole experience where I have to admit, I don't want to blame other people because I kind of gave in and got mixed up in a crowd of people who were all drinking and using drugs and stuff like that. And there's something coming up about I was thinking about like how did I get pulled into that? Like if I was like putting all this energy into trying to be sober, what pulled me in the other direction, kind of thing, right? And then there's also this whole thing about like Carl Jung and shadow projection and all this kind of stuff, and that there's something about the well, you know what, I was thinking, I've got a couple books here to read on the subject, right? And one of these books is Victoria Nelson's The Secret Life of Puppets, and this is a book that I found out about by getting interested in a podcast called Weird Studies, which I support on Patreon because they don't. It's just, I don't know, I feel good about supporting this podcast. Every time I listen to this podcast and I hear their theme music that's there, they don't have ads, they have this cool music that's done by one of the host's brothers, and that I just feel good about that. I'm giving money to this to support these guys doing their thing, and then I get to find out about all this literature and stuff that I was previously unaware of. I had no idea about this book prior to getting involved with this or whatever, getting interested in this podcast. And there's just some good stuff in this book, right? And this is about Carl Jung. the part that I'm going to read here. It goes like this. No, this is a chapter, by the way, on the South Pole, or the North Pole and South Pole. And there's something maybe a little bit... I mean, the North Node and the South Node are nodes of the moon. They don't have... It's more to do with the moon and where the eclipses happen than anything to do with the North Pole and the South Pole. But there's some sort of like... The poles kind of like... Maybe kind of go with it. But you don't have to get too hung up on that. I'm going to read it here. Okay. A mystic or occult notion of both poles also figures strongly in alchemist speculations about the resonating inner and outer worlds. C.G. Jung, the 20th century's only unabashed Neoplatonic philosopher disguised as a psychologist, and not coincidentally a fervent student of alchemical literature, uncovered numerous references to the poles in the works of chemical philosophers. In the Museum Hermeticum, Philalethes asserts that since the magnet has a hidden center which turns toward the pole, thus in the pole is found the heart of Mercurius, which is the true fire wherein its Lord has his rest. He who journeys through this great and wide sea may touch at both Indies, may guide his course by the sight of the North Star, which our magnet will cause to appear to you. Performing his own 20th century downloading of grids, this time into the psychological realm, not the geographical one, Jung interprets this passage as a description of the psyche's irresistible journey or impetus towards wholeness, that is, the Deus absconditus, hidden God, who dwells at the North Pole and reveals himself through magnetism. His other synonym is Mercurius, whose heart is to be found at the pole, and who guides men on the perilous voyage over the sea of the world. The idea is that the whole machinery of the world is driven by the infernal life at the North Pole, that this is hell, and that the system of upper powers reflected, and that hell is a system of upper powers reflected in the lower. Jung believed that the true nature of the pole was a cross from which the four directions radiate. That the quest to reach the pole was symbolic of striving for wholeness as the goal to which the archaic appetite points. The magnetic north, which gives the traveler his bearings on the sea of the world. So there's this, and I just wanted to mention that. I mean, there's something else that I noticed, and this could have been because in another video I was talking about like whether or not I should try to market myself as a New Ager, right? And I don't know. I have this thing coming up recently where I think that the YouTube or maybe not just, well, I don't know. I'm doing it on YouTube. I think the YouTube algorithm is not very good in a sense, or that there may be some kind of a bias against New Age stuff on YouTube. Although they don't censor you for doing New Age stuff, but like I got the algorithm recommended me a video where this guy had a whole channel basically complaining about the law of attraction, or this guy is like set this YouTube channel up to do like a law of attraction experiment, and then he's saying that like the video that I watched anyways, he was like, you know, he ruined his life by trying to do the law of attraction, and the law of attraction is fake and it doesn't work and everything sucks. You know, it's like, it's kind of like, I don't know, I'm just going to tell it to you straight. It's pretty bad, okay? And one of the things I keep thinking is that you see videos there's so much stuff that is kind of mediocre on YouTube, and I don't want to act like, I'm any better. Like, this is not the most perfect channel by any means, but there's something about, I think, like a basic misunderstanding. Like, I think the secret, everybody kind of knows that Oprah Winfrey secret stuff kind of sucks, but people don't usually get into why it's not very good, and that the people who take it seriously get disappointed. And I think this has to do because of what, like, like, if you get into that, that's the alchemical origin for this idea of the law of attraction, or just magnetism, right? And that the force of magnetism is connected to a movement towards wholeness, right? And which brings me to another reading that I have to do. This is a book that, to be honest, it feels like a little bit more like a self-help book, because it's not written in such a way that's as difficult or as heavy as a lot of or I know, it may be heavy in a different way, but it's, Gabor Mate is a local guy from Vancouver who's been in, another guy who I went to go see in person. Before the pandemic, I saw Malidoma in person, I saw Gabor Mate in person, and Gabor Mate was doing a talk on addictions recovery, all this kind of stuff, and this, is, and somewhat ironically, this, while I was being completely sober, abstaining from drugs and alcohol, all this kind of stuff, leading up to my eventual, the force of gravity pulling me back into basically a place where everybody was getting fucked up on drugs and alcohol all the time. And it's sort of like trying to focus my effort into the other direction. There's a polar opposite, right? There's these two poles. I'm trying to go one way, and then I get dragged the other way, right? I don't know. So anyways, I'm going to read from Gabor Mate here, and he's talking about health as a movement towards wholeness. So, having navigated the concentric circles of human health and illness from the cellular to the social, and having traced inextricable and reciprocal connections between them, we now delve into the good news, the topic of healing. The news may be encouraging, but that's not to say it's easy. How to approach healing, after all, in these troubled times. How to move towards health in the context of a socio-economic system staunchly uninterested in remedying any of its root maladies, and in the face of a pandemic that has both highlighted and deprived us of so much that we take for granted. How to keep hope alive when the odds seem so prohibitive. And what is healing anyway? When I speak of healing, I am referring to nothing more or less than a natural movement towards wholeness. Notice that I do not define it as the end state of being completely whole or enlightened or any similar psycho-spiritual ideal. It is a direction, not a destination, a line on the map, not a dot. Nor is healing synonymous with self-improvement. Closer to the mark would be to say is self-retrieval. In fact, our modern self-improvement culture, which has to a large extent been co-opted by the same consumerist forces responsible for the conditions we have been chronicling, can too easily obscure or complicate the healing journey. When we heal, we are engaged in recovering our lost parts of self, not trying to change or better them. As the depth psychologist and wilderness guide Bill Plotkin told me, the core question is not so much looking at what's wrong, but where is the person's wholeness not fully realized or lived out. Healing is also distinct from being cured. The latter means the absence of disease. The former implies coming to wholeness. It's possible to be healed but not cured, and it's possible to be cured but not healed. My colleague, Dr. Lisa Rankin, points out. Ideally, healing and curing happen together, but this isn't always the case. We will see examples of that in the chapters to follow. I have made a similar distinction when it comes to addiction. It is possible to be abstinent without being sober. One is the absence or avoidance of something harmful, itself a worthy objective, while the other is a new positive capacity to live in the present, free to experience life as it is. Analogously, if cure is the banishment of life-impairing symptoms or conditions, healing is the process of reuniting ourselves with the inner qualities that still live within us as inherent possibilities, as I believe they always do, and that make life worth living. We do not heal in order to be cured, even if that understandable wish is present. Healing is best seen as an end in itself. What follows is not an attempt to prescribe a one-size-fits-all solution, no size does, but to point to the possibility of healing on individual and social levels, even in the context of our increasing anxious and disordered culture. I intend also to the best of my ability to offer suggestions about what healing asks of us, the inner and outer conditions that are most hospitable to its flourishing. And now there's a line break here, but I'm going to keep going because there's another thing that I want to read here. And any movement towards wholeness begins with the acknowledgement of our own suffering and of the suffering in the world. This doesn't mean getting caught in a never-ending vortex of pain, melancholy, and especially victimhood, a new and rigid identity founded on trauma, or for that matter, healing. It can be its own kind of trap. True healing simply means opening ourselves to the truth of our lives, past and present, as plainly and as objectively as we can. We acknowledge where we were wounded and, as we were able, perform an honest audit of the impacts of those injuries as they have touched both our own lives and those of others around us. This can be exceptionally difficult for myriad understandable reasons. No matter what degree of discomfort our illusions cover over, the truth hurts, and we don't like hurting if we can help it, even if we sense that something better could lie on the far side of the pain. As Nadzira Mandelstram wrote in her searing memoir of life under Stalinism, Hope Against Hope, it is very difficult to look life in the face. Many of us will be ready to seek the truth only once we have concluded that the cost of not doing so is too high, or once we become sufficiently acquainted with our own ache of longing for the real. The Greek playwright Aeschylus, what's the prince's name? Aeschylus, okay, was exquisitely on point when he had his chorus declare, Zeus has led us on to know, the helmsman lays it down as law, that we must suffer into truth. And I'll stop there. And, I mean, I feel almost a little bit bad about making this about the guy who has a channel where he's complaining about the law of attraction, because it's like, I think I have this principle that I think it's better, instead of seeing something that's mediocre and trying to say that I can do better than that, or seeing something that has a problem and trying to correct it, I always think it's better to like try to shoot for the stars, basically. Like, instead of trying to be like, oh, there's all this mediocre stuff that I could easily do better, I feel like it's better to be ambitious, there's stuff that's better than I am, and I want to aim to get closer to what's better, right? Rather than trying to like make corrections for what's not very good, right? But the whole problem, people complaining about the law of attraction, or they're not able to manifest their dream life or whatever. They make the vision boards and they try to just have good vibes only and be positive, and then it's a disaster for them. And I think this is because, as that line said, and I'm bringing this up because I think it's a sort of synchronicity that he's talking about Zeus here, right? And the helmsman, right? That we must suffer into truth, right? And that if we are, the law of attraction or the law of magnetism is a movement towards wholeness. And if there's some obstacle obstructing our wholeness, that I think if I have to admit that, I mean, I've said it before that I'm, although I've had periods of time where I was trying to be really sober, I still use a bit of cannabis now and then, and that's all I mean, I don't feel like I owe it to everybody to like update them on exactly where I am with everything like this, right? But I've noticed that like it's around eclipses, I notice it's a good time to, like, for me anyways, to take some time off substance use for the sake of not, like, the more I use a substance habitually, the more I'm obviously repressing some kind of emotion. There's some kind of pain that's there, and that you don't want to wallow in pain or just be stuck suffering and not doing anything to help yourself. But by the more we try to only focus on the positive, and that if we're not in touch with the wounded part of ourselves that's hurting, it's like that wounded part of ourselves that's hurting is where we suffer into truth, and that suffering into truth is the movement towards wholeness, right? So, and again, I don't know. Like I said, I'm not claiming like I'm some expert or that I know it all or anything, but this is just something that I noticed in respect to some of these books I've been reading, common themes, and how, when I was talking about spiritual healing before, I think Gabor Mate does a good job of talking about it, that healing and what our idea of what healing is may be kind of simplistic if it simply means getting rid of all the problems and being self-improved and completely optimized, right? That there may be parts of ourselves to be whole may not just be to be like fully optimized, fully like, what's that guy Huberman? Like that, because I mean, you look at Huberman. Huberman is a guy who's like totally successful, but then recently just had all these problems with infidelity, right? And so that, like, to be whole is there's the good and the bad, the light and the dark, the whole thing all together, right? And there's something about the practice of astrology as well, is thinking about the circle, the wheel of the zodiac, and that if we look at your natal chart, you may have placements that put a lot of emphasis on certain parts of the chart that shape your personality in a certain way, that shape your karma or your fate in a certain way, but there's some kind of like movement towards wholeness in the practice of astrology itself. There's also the same thing can be said about tarot, and there is the phrase playing with the whole deck, right? Which comes from, apparently, in the olden days when there's a common thing with tarot where people had superstitions about some of the more negative cards, for example, the devil. That a lot of people thought it was bad, that there was a bad sign to get the devil in a reading, so you're just going to take the devil out of the deck. Or death, right? You take the devil, take the death out of the deck, if the tower gives you anxiety, take that one out too. And so that you're only playing with the positive, we're only manifesting love and light. We're only the sacred, great, the stuff that's good, the highest good or whatever. So we take out the devil, we take out death, we take out anything that scares us, anything that that stirs up emotions we don't want to feel, anything that's coded as being bad. And so we have this sort of like kitschy version, right? But you're not playing with the whole deck if you do that, right? And then I think that there's also this thing that like I was trying to be like totally straight and sober and all this kind of stuff. And then I was kind of like repressing this other side of me that ended up turning into like a total flip the other way. And I was in the midst of this. Well, I mean, I don't know. But the thing is, it's like this. What Gabor Mate is saying is that like sobriety isn't necessarily the same as never using a substance. That you can have. It could be like there could be a kind of like sober attitude that isn't the same as having a really rigid and strict concrete attitude that like I can never go out to the pub, I can never have a puff off a joint, I can I have to be I have to be like, and that's what we're wondering. I don't know. I've never maybe some people they need to do that. That's the way Alcoholics Anonymous. That's their mentality. I'm not going to get into a criticism of Alcoholics Anonymous right now. For my own, I don't know. I tried going to a meeting once, and it just really wasn't my thing. But I do have some kind of, in just thinking about this eclipse cycle coming up, and where I was at 18 years ago as a young person. It's just like I don't have good associations with alcohol. I don't have a good I don't want to be like, I think a lot of time people turn to drugs and alcohol because there's some kind of friction in the social situation, and that the drugs and alcohol act as social lubricant. Right? I remember listening to an interview with the guy from Sleep who did that, that album Dope Smoker. And I think, it's a classic album about, dropping out with the bong in hand and all this kind of stuff. There's some sort of interview with the guy from Sleep, and he was talking about, for him, like, dependency on drugs and alcohol came often from being in a rock band touring and being constantly surrounded by people, being constantly the social stress of like all these people around, and in order to make that tolerable, you have to. It helps to be have a little to lubricate yourself or to make it. But there's a situation where it's like I don't. It seems bad to me if like having a social life is like you either are lonely and isolated and sober, or else you're mixed up with a whole bunch of drug addicts. Like that's like a dichotomous thinking, right? That's like being caught between this binary when the truth could be somewhere in the middle, right? Or that the only if you then there's something also about like the AA mentality of like I can only socialize with other people who are also in recovery, and I need to just block out all the other. It's like, I don't know. I admire the this sort of impulse, or at least whatever, it's played out in my own life, right? That when I started having problems with mental health, that was one. It was like, even without personally identifying with it, it was like an autonomous force of the psyche, right? Like you may not even identify with the will to sobriety or to get better or anything like that, but like this thing exists in like if you're doing too much of it. Like a lot of people talk about how they do a lot of drugs, and then their psychedelic trip is basically the drug saying like, hey man, you shouldn't do so many drugs, right? Like it's something that's it's not your own, even if it's not your own will, the psyche has its own autonomy, and the psyche will tell you when you need to stop, if you need to stop, right? And there's something I think with the lunar eclipse coming up, with Saturn there, there's a certain maturity maybe, or a certain kind of like, I don't know. This is what's on my mind today, anyways, and I thought I'd share it with you. I think this is good enough for right now. So yeah, thanks for watching, and I don't know, I'll be back with another one eventually. Thanks.